Cool. All right. Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is the sixth session of the Kernel Gaming Guild. And as always, the Kernel is the underground stream feeding intentional Web3 projects. It's a place to practice and serve. It's a group of fellows that are exploring Web3 and what it means to build here. And I'll do a little bit of an intro more about that later. But first, I want to start by thanking Tim. Tim, thank you for joining us. And I'll do a little bit of intro on Tim as well. But today we'll be discussing the Loot project. And the reason for that is, well, just going through what the Kernel Gaming Guild has been discussing over the past few weeks. It's really about how do we build games here in Web3. And what we've come to slowly realize, I guess me also personally, is building a game in Web3 isn't just building an ordinary video game, right? You have to learn how to build smart contracts, build on traditional Web2, learn tokenomics, also learn about community and governance. And of course, you have to learn what makes a game or an experience successful. It has to be discoverable. It has to be spread to the people who need to hear about it. And that's why we have Tim here. Tim has built stuff for the Loot project, which I feel is one of the most successful projects in Web3 games. And I guess that also that discussion on games is really an interesting point as well. It's like the Loot project itself isn't a traditional game, but there's a lot of playfulness to it, a lot of creation, and yeah, I'm very happy to be able to talk to Tim about that today in our session. And a little bit more about the Kernel Gaming Guild also for Tim. The goal here is, as I mentioned, we want to kind of explore how to make games in Web3. We've seen games kind of be, I guess, one of the apps that we see in Web3, starting from CryptoKitties, of course, Axie Infinity, Gods Unchained, and we've seen these new games come out. And the Loot project, I would say, is a very unique one, a very interesting project that we haven't really seen in Web2. And a lot of it is because of the collaborative world building, which we see only Loot and some of these projects able to successfully do. And a little bit about the Kernel Fellows. Of course, everyone here already knows who you are, but yeah, just to reiterate, what's really good about the Kernel Fellowship is we're not just engineers, we're not just builders. We are people who come from different diverse backgrounds, people who are geniuses in music, fashion, climate tech as well, cooperatives, and food. And with incredibly multiple lives, like quantum computing scientist, a Bollywood actor, filmmaker, and a farmer. So it's this diversity of thought that I think Web3 really needs. And we're very grateful to have all of you here. And with that, I want to introduce Tim. So Timshel, as he's known in Twitter and in the Lootverse, is the Lord of Lore of Lootverse. And I feel is the Web3 is the only place where you'll find a title like that, right? And it's also, I would say, representative of what's important here in Web3. If you guys have seen some of the articles shared by Sid on Slack around lore building, shared by Venkatesh Rao, I think. Lore is very important in Web3. It seems like there's a lot of magic that's flowing through the threads of what we're building in Web3. So, and maybe Tim, I can give you the mic for a sec to give an intro on yourself and Loot.
Right on. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your inspirational words here. You definitely are living it and feeling it and believing in this movement that I think we're all collectively building. Today's discussion is going to be, I would say, everything from micro to macro to meta, in that we're going to go micro details into some of the things going on in the Lootverse and beyond. We're going to go macro into what it means to do collaborative world building and how that's been unlocked and enabled by Web3. And then we're going to go meta in terms of the fact that what we are doing right now on this phone call is itself world building, and is itself as a group of us building a new type of work and a new type of game. And this thing that's happening right now to me is a moment in a metagame. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'll give you a tiny background on myself. My whole life, I've been a fantasy nerd, sci-fi nerd, a reader, a writer, a geek. That's I guess my heart in some ways. In real life, I'm a dad. I've got a family here in California, born and raised in the Bay Area. I've been here forever. And in real life, I guess I'll say I'm also a boring tech co-founder. I've been co-founder, I've been CEO of a company. My co-founder and I actually just got to a really interesting stage in our company in the past about year and a half, after spending about 13 years building a company that got to do a lot in an industry and rethink the way an industry was working and add a whole new lens to an industry that ended up taking off into something much larger than just our small company. We did get up to like a couple hundred employees, which was an interesting experience. And I've learned a lot along the way about world building and lore building inside of a company like that as the connective tissue of keeping people together and giving people shared vision and shared mission and shared purpose in a drier way. If we're talking about hard tech company, B2B software type stuff, but it's still critically important. At the end of the day, we're all just people. At the end of the day, a quote employee of a company is still just John and Jill and Jack and Jane, and they're gamers and they have families and they have their own hopes and dreams. And so just because you work at a company doesn't mean that you are Microsoft or that you are Nike or that you are Apple. I often say that to folks that I work with, when you're even selling to somebody who works at Apple or Nike or Ubisoft or Activision or striking a partnership with Sony, you're not really striking a partnership with Sony. You're striking a partnership with Jane, who works at Sony. And she herself has her own hopes and dreams and her own lore that she wants to both be part of and also help co-write. And so I think that's what's happening for us as a group here together, is that we're collectively in this Web3 universe writing the new rules and creating the new playbooks and creating the new infrastructure that we get to play within. And I use play there in a broad sense, but that the next generation of builders and dreamers and devs and designers and writers and storytellers and artists and more get to participate in. So a little bit, just a tiny bit more about me. Why I've been spending so much time here is that I have been fully nerd sniped by Loot. Back in August, Dom launched Loot quietly on I think it was a Sunday afternoon or something. I think it was August 27th. And it just clicked for a lot of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people. Something clicked in that it opened up our eyes to this idea that we could build a world collectively together in the same spirit as a Game of Thrones or a Lord of the Rings or a Star Wars, in that it could be multimedia, multi-channel, from low fidelity to high fidelity. It could be something that touches the world and touches all sorts of different people. But instead of it being media produced by a central entity in Burbank, California, Disney, or produced by HBO and distributed and sold, it could be collectively created and collectively owned by the builders and players themselves who were part of it. That vision hadn't crystallized so clearly on day one of Loot. Day one and really week one and week 1, 2, 3 of Loot was complete, absolute mania. I don't know how much trading, but probably 20,000 ETH of trading in the first couple of weeks. Just a ridiculous, I don't know what you want to call it, just a ridiculous FOMO experience. I think of a lot of people being like, what is this? I know it's important. I need to buy it. I need to be part of it. And while that was fun, that was actually pretty distracting, I think, from the core heart of Loot that we had all been pretty excited about. And so after that first introduction to the universe, the big bang of Loot event, things quieted a bit, and people have come together through the mist from all around the world, from Thailand, Kuala Lumpur, China, Singapore, New York, California, Puerto Rico, London, Portugal. I'm just thinking about people that I even have calls with these days, plus more, to build, to collaborate, to create art, to create stories, to create media, and to create games, like quote real capital G games, playable games that you can step in and with your controller play a game. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And over the past, I guess, 6 months, it's crazy it's been 6 months, but over the past 6 months, that dream has started to come to life. In my real life, I actually have been able to find a model where I can level out of an operational role of my company. And my company was actually acquired about a year and a half ago. And so it was like perfect timing for this moment in the world. And I have been able to just go full on into the hyperverse, into the Lootverse. And the energy that I get from it every day and the energy from the people that are around us is like unlike anything I've ever seen. There's a lot of challenge and a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos in decentralized organizations and decentralized world building. But there is something magical about the idea that we could build a decentralized media universe, a decentralized world that's permissionless and composable and on chain, and I'd say infinitely expansive, yet still cohesive. And that's one of the things that brings a lot of energy to the people in the Lootverse. That I don't know if today is me giving advice or just kind of riffing, but some advice I would give is that if somebody is doing a world building project or any real like decentralized project, to me it's important that it's both of those things. It's important that it's both infinitely expansive, permissionless, composable, ideally open source, that the community can feel like they're owners and creators of it, not just players. So infinitely expansive, yet still cohesive. In that, in Loot's case, I'm going to show you some slides in a second. In Loot's case, it could have devolved and still could devolve into just a bunch of random projects that happen to use the same fantasy words, which is cool. But the internet is full of that. If you go to the internet and you type in the word katana, you'll find a bunch of random stuff about katanas that are completely unconnected to each other. And a bunch of unconnected nodes doesn't make a world. A decentralized world can still be infinitely expansive with infinite room for creativity, but with a sense of shared physics and a sense of shared principles and maybe a shared timeline. I'm going to talk about that a little bit today, but like a shared meta timeline of just like, what's the meta timeline of Star Wars? If anybody on this call wanted to make a Star Wars movie, you'd probably be able to do it because you know how to sort of fit it into the general meta story or the meta concept of Star Wars. You could rewind 10,000 years, you could fast forward 10,000 years. But if you build something that's like fundamentally at odds with the existing foundational physics of a universe, that's fundamentally contradictory of the existing foundational premise of that universe, it's interesting and fun, but it's almost like a parody, or it's like another project as opposed to one unified sort of cohesive yet expansive project. So I'm probably going too far, but I just wanted to introduce sort of some of the themes I wanted to talk about today. I'd say the themes coalesce to collaborative world building, collaborative media, and this concept that through those two things, we can manifest joy out of thin air, that we can manifest joy out of teamwork, out of learning, people learning together, and out of self-discovery. I've thought a lot about that over the past 6 months, like where does joy manifest from out of thin air? And it's many places for many people. For me, it's those three things. And I think that's probably a pretty universal principle, that joy comes from teamwork and accomplishing goals together, even if those goals are silly. What is a guild if not a bunch of geeks of us coming together to do accomplish a goal together inside of a game? But I'm sure you guys would agree there's moments of joy. Two is learning, joy even through school, and joy through like deep learning, joy through putting your head down in a project and getting into a flow state and making a breakthrough and learning something. But then also joy through self-discovery, finding out something about yourself or reinforcing something about yourself or feeling good about yourself. Those moments are hard and those moments are few and far between. And if you can manifest those moments in any context, whether it's games or media or school or work or whatever, those are moments to bottle up and recognize and at least pause and say, wow, that's a special thing. And that doesn't come around that often. And through Loot, I think a lot of people have been feeling that through teamwork, through trading, through building together, through surprising each other and surprising themselves. I'll stop here for 1 second, Paul. That's a long intro and whatever to this whole talk, but I have a whole deck. I can talk through it. But maybe before I do that, let's have a little chat. You give me your thoughts and comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. That's a very nice way to put it. I really like also how you mentioned joy, and before I give you the mic again to talk about your slides, I think one thing we could do is you talk a little bit about the slides, and then let's leave some space for Q&A. But one thing we're doing with Kernel, and something I'm doing this Kernel block, is I want to give the guests an experience of what Kernel is. Kernel is very philosophical. It's really grounded on why should we be making the things we're making, and what you mentioned around joy really speaks to that. And I guess I want to share this slide on infinite games, because the gaming guild, this is one of the main themes that we have on the gaming guild, which is infinite games. I don't know if you've read Dr. Cars's Finite and Infinite Games, Tim, but he says that there are two kinds of games, like the finite and the infinite. And a finite game is one that is played for the purpose of winning, and an infinite game is for the purpose of continuing play. And I feel that that really speaks to what you guys are building at Loot. And I guess one other part, the last part, which is the finite play for life is serious, while the infinite play of life is joyous. And it really syncs well with how you mentioned joy, how people find joy in building Loot, and also with how what we're doing now is storytelling. It's narrative building as well. So this is how we find joy in communion like this. So maybe there's something here that speaks to you, Tim, before I give you the floor.
I really dig it. I mean, why don't I use this as a transition slide here? I really like it.
Oh, yeah, and I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, so I just shared my slide, but I'm gonna stay on your topic for a second. This is the first slide of my deck, and so maybe this was meant to be. World building itself is an infinite game, and these are some tweets and some moments of joy from even players across the Lootverse saying, I love this one on the right from Will Papper, who's an internet friend and founder of a company called Syndicate.io. He says it's a category error that a loot game needs to be a video game with graphics and standard controls. Crypto native games are collaboration games, and they take on the best elements of cooperation fostered by MMOs, and they distill it down to its essence. I thought there's something really powerful and poetic about that. Dylan is having a ton of fun. Dylan's the CEO of Figma, having a ton of fun in the Lootverse, playing along. And there's just something special about sort of building this meta game together of Web3 and the Hyperverse, but also just building the Lootverse together. So I'm happy to talk through it. I think, given who's on the call today, I'm going to go pretty quick through the idea of like, what is the Hyperverse and what is Web3, obviously, since you guys are deep in it. But I do want to frame it a little bit. And I think you guys might appreciate this fun framing. So we're going to talk about, let's see if I can slideshow. Present, will this work? Yeah, this is good. So we're going to talk about these themes: permissionless, composable, decentralized, and on-chain world building. And I'm going to unpack each of those concepts and then use Loot as the mechanism through which we talk about them. Where I want to start, though, is with this, which I think will resonate. That this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do think there's something powerful here. That what we've been calling the metaverse, Facebook showed up, 6 months ago and said, we're going to change the name of our company to Meta. And there was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment from this universe saying like, all right, metaverse or Meta, you can have metaverse. We're going to be the hyperverse, meaning you can be the empire. We're going to be the rebel alliance. You can have clean streets. You can have, your your army protecting the people. You can control the APIs. You can make it safe. You can have an app store where you make sure people don't get scammed. And that's honestly a good thing. Lots of this stuff is good. Like Apple in a lot of ways is similar to this. Apple's got their stormtroopers walking around making sure that Apple store is clean, making sure that the Apple platform is clean, and that when you download an app from the App Store, it's paying its tithe to Apple, and as a result of that, it's also safer. But also as a result of that, the users and the creators who are building in that universe don't really own the universe. They might own their games, that's fine. And this example here is good. Like a user in Facebook's metaverse can own a sword or own a hat, and maybe they can even resell that hat and that sword. But what they can't own is the metaverse itself, meaning that Meta/Facebook owns it, or Activision or Ubisoft, whoever the company is that creates it for you, they're the one who owns it. And that's fine. That's how companies work. That's how companies have worked for hundreds of years. The company creates something, the company has the equity value, the company has the control. And honestly, that's how most companies probably will exist for a long time. But I'm gonna share a counterpoint to this, or maybe a different way. It's almost like just companies versus open source. But let's just stay on this metaverse concept for a second. Meta sets up the metaverse. It's VR, Oculus experience, great. Meta manages all the APIs and the SDKs and makes sure that they're clean and safe. Meta approves your app. Meta controls the protocol. And they do give the users the ability to kind of own digital goods, which is great, and also sell their digital goods, which is great too. But they're surely not giving control of the platform to the users. And they're surely not giving control of the entire company to the users. As opposed to what's happening in Web3 and what the rest of this discussion will be about today, we're calling it the hyperverse, but really you could just call it Web3, where it is permissionless, it is composable, it's decentralized, and not only is it steered by the community, it's also owned by the community. That the projects here, especially the decentralized ones, end up being shepherded by a team, clearly, but collectively owned and collectively steered by the players, by the community, and by an expansive group of people who can come together to build on top of it. These are way too many words here, but I'll just say the concept out loud that in this case, let's just use Loot as the example. Dom built the first Loot contract and launched it. And he said, this is open source, open to anybody, do with it anything you want. And then the community came together and the community began to build this metaverse or build this hyperverse, began to build the protocol, began to expand on it with public goods, began to manage open source tech around Loot, began to create a community itself. And the community itself is the ones who tacitly approve or add or change things on the protocol. The community controls the protocol. The individual projects who are built on top of the protocol or within the community are done permissionlessly. Anyone can do it.
But I turn it off.
Okay, that's good.
I don't have mute capabilities up. The community can tacitly decide through its actions what becomes canon versus not, what becomes part of this world versus not. And there's gray areas to all of that. It's not, there's not a vote. It's more about actions and who does what. But in this case, if somebody like buys a sword or buys a hat or sells a sword or sells a hat, you don't need to call up Father Facebook and ask permission. You just do it. You can own them, you can resell them, and if there are fees involved here, they go back to the project or back to the protocol, and the community collectively steers it. So that's a pretty broad concept, but I think it's pretty powerful. And I think both need to exist. Like both of things need to exist here. The same way that open source software needs to exist right in line with centralized software. The difference is within Web3, open source doesn't just have to be a public good and doesn't just have to be for the goodness of the heart as a side project or something. What is open source can also be highly profitable, and what is open source can also be highly scalable. So we're going to be talking about these concepts here, and I'm going to dig into Loot in a second. Permissionless, though, the biggest theme these days has been this concept of CC 0, Creative Commons 0, no rights reserved, gifted to the internet, whether it's code, whether it's art, whether it's stories and media, or a game itself, gifted to the internet as an open source project that anybody can build on top of and anybody can expand. CC 0, if you haven't seen this theme, I'm sure you'll start to see more of it. There are a lot of really powerful CC 0 projects that are coming out, and this movement's just getting started. Composable, meaning that it's interoperable and extensible without the need for a centralized API, so that it can be composable on chain. And once something's on chain, like in this case, Loot, all these items are on chain, anybody can build on top of it, and anybody can can grab that data from the contract without having to like hit up, in this case, Dom Hoffman launched Loot. He doesn't maintain a centralized API for other people to hit. It's just on chain. There's an on-chain contract for Loot, and anyone who wants to build on top of it can hit it and build on top of it and hit it. We have there is a universe of things that are happening in the Lootverse built on top of this crazy simple, deceptively simple NFT on the right here that has just birthed an entire universe. In this case, this is what the actual code looks like. That you can look at the Loot contract, but in the Loot contract, the like coup de grace core of this is that there's some logic around deterministic but random assignment of items inside of a quote loot bag, and that given a loot bag ID 652, you can then pluck from the contract exactly what weapon, exactly what chest armor, exactly what helmet, exactly what waist armor, etc. comes from that specific loot ID. And then hidden inside this contract are a bunch of other sort of canonical principles and traits and levels and rankings and character classes and things like that the community has distilled out of this contract and built. Like if this is level 0, we built like level 1 canon or level 1 open source composable contracts ourselves on top of this. It's also decentralized. I'm not going to talk too much about decentralized today, but Loot is the most decentralized game I've seen yet, in that it's almost so decentralized that it's almost not even a DAO, meaning it's decentralized because no one owns it, and it's sort of autonomous. I mean, it's, I guess, autonomous, but it's almost not even an O, meaning it's almost not even an organization. The Loot doesn't even really have a DAO yet. We are working on building potentially a DAO model that has like a bit of a steering committee and a collective vision and a group of people who can help shepherd the organization of it forward. It's a very loose DAO today, in that it's a Discord and a bunch of people building in a ton of different directions that we are all working together to inspire people and give people access to things like this. Like, if you're going to come build in the universe, here's a guidebook, and you can choose to ignore this if you want, but here's a guidebook designed for builders and developers and designers who want to build this cohesive Lootverse together. That we believe that from this canonical foundation, we can build this infinitely expansive universe that's got a meta timeline. It's got what we're calling an LDK. Maybe I'll unpack this idea in a second. It's got canonical principles right inside the contract. Like here, I'll show an example. So inside of a loot contract, loot bag, there are a lot of principles and there are a lot of hidden things inside of this. And so what we're doing as a group is providing the breadcrumbs and the options and the opportunity for someone to build a cohesive universe, but no one's required to, because there's nobody who owns Loot. So if somebody wanted to come in and say, I see how loot bags work, and I see that there are 16 orders, and I see that there are item levels from the contract, that there's like specific levels for these items right inside your contract. I see all this, but I'm going to choose to ignore that, and I'm going to choose to do something that fundamentally contradicts the Loot contract. There's no one to call them up and say, no, don't do that. The only way to stop that, and we shouldn't even stop that, but the only way to stop that would be that by the community just saying, come on, guys, can you please participate in a collaborative ecosystem versus forking away to do something different. And honestly, both are going to happen, and both are interesting. And so the goal is not about control. The goal is really about like maximizing the fun and excitement and the joy that can come out of this. And I think a lot of us believe that if we, there's thousands of us, if we develop on top of a generalized unified foundation with just like some shared physics, some core principles, that the Lootverse will feel like a much more exciting, much more cohesive, much more rewarding experience to be part of, because you'll be able to jump from place to place, from project to project, and it'll just feel like it fits together. Maybe with like a little bit of parallel universe stuff, and definitely not with Sorry, so definitely not with storylines that have to be linear, and definitely not with characters that have to be exactly linear all the way. So it's, in that sense, it's not like a singular Star Wars with, episode 1, 2, 3 that has to have a narrative thread all the way. But there's something special happening here, and to me, at least, the world building aspect of this means that we do need to be at least respectful of the idea of trying to build something generally cohesive. So that was the decentralized comment. The way that this world works is that we have, I think there's like 80,000 users in the Discord, but Discord's so crazy that probably a lot of those are bots, or they're people who joined in week 1 and never came back. But it's pretty active, and not only in the Loot Discord, but there's 10 other Discords. There's a Genesis Project Discord, there's a Realms Discord, there's a Loot Explorers Discord, there's a Hyperloot Discord, there's a Crypts Discord, there's a Crypts and Caverns Discord. So that we're still figuring out, how do you build a multi-Discord community that's so decentralized. But for whatever reason, so far, it's working. It's this like fragile flame in our hands, and we're doing everything we can to give it some kindling and help bring it to life. What you're looking at here is a screenshot of like one of our weekly town squares. We've been doing weekly town squares for the past 4 months, and everyone gets together and does something pretty magical without much organization. I and Andrew, who's sort of my co-partner on helping to just like corral this universe and coordinate the weekly calls and just coordinate information and more. We do a little bit throughout the week of just getting people to say, hey, I want to speak, I want to present on this town hall, but mostly it's it's definitely not a company presenting, it's all hands meeting. It's an open call for presentations, and every week it turns into a 2-hour session of people from around the world showing up saying, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been working on something for the past 2 months that I'm ready to share. Just yesterday, we had our all hands at 9 a.m, and a team showed up and said, hey, we've been working on a Dungeons and Dragons game for the Lootverse. Can we demo it to everybody? And can we get some feedback on it? And it was just one of those special moments of like, okay, who are you guys? Introduce yourselves. Where did you come from? What are you working on? And just every week, there's something so special like that. So this like weekly all hands has become sort of a Lootverse all hands. It's become a show and tell for builders in the Lootverse, a feedback session, but it's also in some ways become kind of like a step into the hyperverse. And that a lot of times these Loot Town squares go beyond loot, because these builders contain multitudes. I mean, these builders are not just building for loot, they're also building their own projects. They're also working in their own companies or their own jobs or their own outside of loot art projects and more. And so every week this call ends up being pretty exciting, because it's not just loot, it's also an expansive step into other hyperverse projects. All right, that's decentralized stuff. On-chain stuff, I'm not going to talk that much about this, because the on-chain stuff is a whole big can of worms, and I want to talk about it more from like what it enables for this specific community. And what on-chain enables for this world is that it enables composability, and it enables collaborative ownership and collaborative creation, and it encourages a lot of CCO. It encourages a lot of, this is open and anyone can build on top of it. You can do that without being on chain. You can just publish code to GitHub, sure, and say this is CCO. You can just publish art to an Amazon web server and say this is CCO. You can write a story and publish it to Medium and say this is CCO. But something about being on chain crystallizes that, and crystallizes that on the blockchain forever, that says, yeah, this is my phrase, thou mayest, like thou mayest build on top of this. Thou mayest take this project or take this art or take this story or take this code and expand it. And without any fear of retribution, without any fear of a company knocking on your door and saying, why did you touch my code, or why did you touch my art? Being on chain and being CCO is a sort of magical foundation to create this sort of meta world around a project, with community, with media, with NFTs, with games, with content, with partners, with collaborative ownership and collaborative creation. It doesn't have to be CCO, it doesn't have to be on chain, but those two mechanics have really enabled this kind of explosion. So I'm going to end this like this is not an intro, but I'm gonna end this part about Web3 on this slide, and I'm gonna pause, and then we can talk a little bit more specifically about Loot and some of the projects in the Lootverse that are pretty exciting. But just wanted to share some like select hyperverse Web3 projects that I love and that I think represent the ethos of this universe. Loot, obviously. Punks now, though Punks is going through its own change in the world, so maybe this needs to be parentheses around Punks, I don't know. But projects like Exquisite Land, if you haven't seen that, is freaking incredible. Collaborative art creation. Blitmap, which is Dom's other project. Chain Runners, Math Castles Terraforms, who's having a moment right now. John Palmer and Sharuz's Shields project. Polys.art is an incredible collaborative art project. OKPC that just launched 44 minutes ago is a project that I've gotten to be a participant in and a founding artist on and a, I don't know, advisor and friend on, which is really exciting. If you want to check out OKPC, it's okpc.app, and it's a super, super cool project that's just sort of the exact vibes of what we're talking about today. There's a project called Forgotten Runes that's doing this around like wizard cults and card playing and lore building and more and more and more. This is just a select group of projects. But all of them just share something special. And what they share is that they are all experiments. And they're all experiments in decentralized, trustless teamwork to build collaborative Web3 media universes together, big and small. Not everything needs to be crazy huge. Loot is at a pretty incredible level of scale. I think, Paul, when you introduced this, you said Loot's been one of the most successful Web3 games and Web3 media universes probably ever created. And success depends on what we're talking about. But if you look at it in terms of trading volume, agree, this is an insane number. And this is just on OpenSea. This is an insane number of trades that have happened. But to me, it's less about the like financial success of Loot, because again, nobody owns Loot, everybody owns Loot. It's more about the joy and the excitement and the community and the world building that's happened out of this. I've never seen anything like this. And maybe there is others, I'm only just scratching the surfaces of Web3, so maybe there is something else like Loot out there where developers and designers and writers and storytellers and gamers and players and nerds to business people around the world come together to get together weekly and build a decentralized universe that may exist somewhere else. I haven't seen it, but that to me is the success of Loot, is that it's shown a way to build a decentralized, collaboratively created, globally owned media universe. Back to where I started, like a Game of Thrones, like a Lord of the Rings, like a Star Wars, but instead of being owned by Paramount or Disney or HBO, being collectively owned, collectively created by the builders and players themselves who are playing inside of it and creating it. And with many of those actions being on chain. A lot of the lore that's being created in the Lootverse is through players' actions raiding a dungeon, through players' actions distilling mana from their loot bags and summoning the spirits of a Genesis adventure, which is a very fantasy way to describe that. But this is an on-chain action. You're doing an on-chain action to take a loot bag, bring it to the fire, and distill an item out of it from the ancient days of Loot, put them together and summon the spirit of this ancient adventurer. I can talk about the specific project, but I'm using it as an example of the types of on-chain actions that are happening here in the Lootverse, where those on-chain actions are themselves also composable. And those on-chain actions now are being pulled together into other projects. Like there's a project called The Rift that's just going live, rift.live here. And it's creating an XP and leveling infrastructure for Loot that's saying, let me look at what this loot bag has done across the Lootverse. So what has this loot bag done across the Genesis project, across banners, with a crypt, with rings, with realms, with characters? What has this bag done? Let me give it XP. So that's a kind of a micro detail, but that makes a pretty macro point that even the player's actions being on chain allow them to be composable to let other people build on top of those player actions. That, to me, that's a really special thing. I'm gonna pause. I've gone pretty deep on loot already, and we're at 45 minutes in here. You can tell that I am a geek about this and excited about this and having a ton of fun explaining it. Hopefully y'all are excited too. I see Kirill down here. Your smiles are giving me energy, so thanks for that. Paul, maybe I'll hand the mic to you just for a sec. I don't have that many slides on loot stuff, but I do want to show some visuals of like all the exciting projects that are happening. But maybe you take the mic back and share your thoughts.
Oh yeah, thank you, Tim. That's a very good way of showing us what Loot has done. I really agree that the success of Loot isn't with the amount of Ethereum it's raised, but just this energy around people co-creating it, and a lot of projects are learning from Loot. A lot of projects are looking at how to replicate the same success. So yeah, so thank you for that, and I want to leave space for the folks to have some questions. And Sean, I know you have some questions. Maybe you want to hop on the mic and ask them for Tim.
Hey, Sean.
Yep. Hey, Tim. Really appreciate you going over all of this. I just had a couple questions. So I'm curious about how, I know you're also an active part of Corruptions and some of Dom's other projects. And I'm curious, does this fit into the Lootverse at all? And is there kind of a meta collaboration between all of Dom's projects and these kind of fantasy-like projects, even Forgotten Ruins and the like? And I'm curious what similarities and differences you see across them.
Yeah, I think I can share without like spilling too many beans because most of us do work in public here. Corruptions is separate from Loot for sure, but Corruptions may end up being part of SUP, which is Dom's company. He just launched and raised a round of funding and incorporated, and so Corruptions is coming up soon on a vote where Dom, as the game master inside of this Corruptions experience that we're all playing, is going to present the community with a vote to say, hey, should we stay as a separate outside art project, community project, or should we get nestled under SUP and get a product manager and an art team and other people involved in this thing? So that is one thing I can share. The other thing I can share that I think Dom has been public about is that he has had this vision, maybe a seed of a vision in his mind around building a quest for Loot. He actually calls it a.quest. If you go to a.quest, you can see he's got a landing page here. And this has been up for a number of months. And I think, I don't want to speak for him too much, but this is a big idea and it's a big undertaking. And I think it's got a lot of rough edges. And to set off on a quest obviously takes the first step, but it's to go on a capital Q quest, you need to really like get your bearings first. And so Corruptions in some ways is a test bed for mechanics that may play out in a quest. I think I'll leave it there on that with Corruptions.
I also wanted to ask, maybe because I've been a game developer for a while, and what I've seen a lot of the Loot or a lot of the NFT projects do is they'll do an NFT sale and then try to build a game out of it, right? Which is a video game, like a video game you play with a joystick or a keyboard. And I feel like Loot understands better than most that the games that are going to be played on Web3 aren't these kinds of games. I see, for example, I see like an NFT project of 10,000 creatures, and then you try to make a game out of it, and it doesn't seem like that's the perfect form for the narrative or for what they're building. And yeah, I'm just curious also to hear how you're thinking about it. Do you see the Lootverse to become like an MMO or a game like the ones that we see played like Destiny, or is the Lootverse going to be something else? And what kind of vision do you have for that, for the Lootverse?
Yeah, so Loot will be all of those things. The same way that Star Wars is small games and big games, and small stories and big stories, and comic books to kids books to Lego characters to movies. Loot is all of those things, honestly, and more. Loot has characters. Loot has games, from collectible card trading character building games, which is a project that I built here called Genesis Project that I can share, to settling and pillaging and raiding games like resource management games, to crypt dungeon crawling games, to like fully playable immersive VR games. Yeah, it's everything in between. Plus, items. There's amazing 3D rings, and there's a whole project here around building physical items that have NFC chips inside of them, so you can do physical real life LARPing with loot items. There's a whole ecosystem being built. There's collaborative media projects. A project that I'm deeply involved in called Divine DAO is working towards bringing the Lootverse to life with collaborative media and collaborative content and high fidelity stories and characters. Plus a bunch of public goods and foundational tech like the XP leveling system I showed you. It's everything. You will be able, and fingers crossed, you will be able to play a game of loot or built on loot with a joystick and a controller and a VR headset. But you're also going to be able to play this kind of collectible card trading game where you're collecting items and trading items with a community and using those items to then summon the spirit of another character and then entering the Lootverse with that character. I can maybe talk about this one because this is my heart. This is a project that I built around loot that's been pretty exciting and has brought a lot of people together. But it's a cool example of like, oh, actually, you know what? You can't see my screen, huh? You only see my slides.
We can see the Genesis
Okay.
project one.
Oh, you do? Okay, good.
Yeah.
There's a cool example of like a game that's not a immersive visual game. It's not a like step into the game and play it kind of game. It's a card trading game. Maybe I'll share this one and then I'm going to circle back. So yeah, let me share this because this is the project. Yeah, I've gotten involved in helping to sort of shepherd and lead is not the right word, but help lead or help bring some leadership to the Lootverse. But also I've been able to build my own project within it. And this Genesis project is something that like 5 or 6 days after the creation of Loot, my real life co-founder and a group of I guess decentralized pseudonymous friends came together and said, hey, we see something in this contract that's pretty unexpected. Through this contract, it turns out there's order and there's structure and there's an unexpected hint, maybe unintended hint, but an unexpected hint that these loot bags, we looked at these loot bags here. These are not just random collections of fantasy items. Inside of these loot bags, they look random, but in lore form, if it's random, it must have come from somewhere. If this bag is full of 8 items, where did it come from? Where these items originate from? And we set out on this quest to figure out what was the origin state of the Lootverse. Like what was the original form of these bags in lore form? But what was the original state of these bags before they were traded and used in wars and battle and traded from father to son and mother to daughter and passed over the years? Like where'd they come from? And so we launched a project called the Genesis Project, which is a quest to, quote, summon the spirits of the original Genesis adventurers, the like first adventurers of the Lootverse. That what people are doing is taking their loot bags, they're distilling items out of them. So they're taking a loot bag and they're then distilling what we call Genesis mana out of those loot bags. So they're like essentially distilling specific pieces of loot or specific items, Felchian of power. And you can see here that this is, yes, it's an NFT project, but it's something a little different. It's like collectible cards that on their face look like little silly pictures, but similarly, through the, I guess, trading volume, you can see that it's just a really active project that people have had a ton of fun playing it to then take this Genesis mana, trade with each other in Discord, on Twitter, through really fun and innovative of ways of reaching people to say, hey, you have the bone wand of power I need, but you're anonymous. How do I find you? And so through that, we built projects like we built a thing called Bottle.2, which is kind of fun to say like, hey, it's Timshel and I'm reaching out to this wallet and like, I need your wand of power as a way to then send an NFT on L1 to somebody's wallet as a way to like reach out through the mist and say, hey, I want to connect with an anonymous wallet. And this has actually been used by a lot of projects in a lot of interesting ways. but I just share it as a fun side note of like, when you build in the open or you build open source, you find sort of unexpected ways to build tools on top of it, and unexpected fun moments like that. Anyway, so with this project, the idea here is that you mint these cards and then you collect them together, and with a perfect set of Genesis mana, you get to then mint a Genesis adventure. So with a perfect set of, I would log in, but I don't want to screen share and record with my MetaMask open here. But you know, if you would, in my wallet, I would see like all my items of the giants or something, and then I would decide from my items, once I've collected all of them successfully, okay, I've got this Genesis adventure ready to go. Once they're in my own wallet, it would say mint here, and I can mint and summon my own Genesis adventure. And then these Genesis adventures are the most powerful origin characters of the Lootverse. And people are having a ton of fun with these too. Each of these look like a loot bag, but a little bit higher fidelity, a little bit more advanced, a little bit more nuanced, in that they were created by the users purposefully. And the users each distilled this mana out of the loot bags and then traded with each other and then created these characters. So each of these Genesis adventures are themselves on-chain actions and on-chain proof of collaboration, that every one of these pieces of Genesis mana has an origin story. This Genesis mana was distilled from his bag by Nikabar, who was then traded to me, and then I used it to mint a Genesis adventure of the twins. And that's on chain forever. And that story, and there's a lot of really cool stories through that, are there to be composed on top of, and there as inspiration for other stories. So I can pull off of this one, but I wanted to share it because I have spent many hundreds of hours working on this and having a ton of fun. The community is super active, and it's just a bunch of like geeks and gamers and fantasy nerds and devs and artists and others coming together to say, yeah, let's find the origin stories, not just in the characters, but also then let's bring them to life with art, with stories, with media, and let's really like, here, I will actually show something. Here's a snapshot of the Loot Discord right now. Within the Genesis Project Discord, I wanted to share, we have a whole channel about lore, and inside here, there's just some magic happening where people are saying like, okay, we're creating these Genesis adventures, but now we're telling their stories, and now we're discovering their stories, and we're writing their stories, and they're full-on stories with characters and character development and surprise and delight and moments. But instead of them just being like random pieces of lore on the internet, they're connected to bags, and they're connected to NFTs, and they're connected to this Genesis loot bag, this realm, this time period. And so there's just something really magical happening here, that through the collaborative creation and discovery of these characters, people are also starting to then discover their stories, tell their stories, and come together to collaboratively create the media on top of this stuff, in addition to also the on-chain NFTs. So that is the Genesis project. I'll show, like, I'm gonna do like 2 more minutes of this and then hand it back. There's a ton of these projects. I'll just show like a couple here. There's character visualizers. Here's a loot bag visualized as a character that you can play. Here's this whole questing experience called Loot Explorers. You take your loot bag, you create this sort of more cartoony version of a character, and then you can go on a quest. And this Loot Explorers team has done some really fun quests already. There's a project called Hyperloot that's launching pretty soon. Check out their Twitter, but they have some incredible art. It's like this and more, that they also are making CCO and open source, and they're sharing their Illustrator files and Photoshop files and their 3D files and also their code to have others build on top of this. This is like a layer 2 for the Lootverse. Projects like this with rings, where you can distill the ring out of your bag, and then all of a sudden you have this beautiful 3D ring, and then you can play it and craft it and use it. We just talked about Genesis project. There's a project called Realms that's probably the largest Lootverse project right now. Realms is a settling game and a resource management game. You can see sort of a preview of the map here, atlas.biblioteca.xyz. And through this, you can then discover, the Lootverse. You can discover each of these Genesis adventures. You can discover each of these loot bags. You can discover these crypts and caverns. And over time, this is just going to become, higher and higher fidelity, and more and more playable and exciting. That you've just got these like characters and stories and on-chain NFTs in a collective universe that is all cohesive, but coming to life sort of collaboratively. I mentioned Divine. Divine is working on story building and really like bringing the Lootverse to life with collaborative storytelling and visual media. Soon to launch the next chapter of this, so stay tuned for this. This should be pretty exciting over the next coming weeks or so. And more and more and more. I'm not going to get into all of this now. Though actually, this is kind of cool. This is like a preview trailer for Divine DAO that people have been working on, or that I guess we have been working on, just like sort of previewing the story of Loot in visual art form. I'll leave it there, but there's Divine Gates, there's a Divine City, there's stories to be discovered and told. I mentioned physical items. Here's some examples of like physical loot items in the universe. I don't have any of these yet, but I definitely want one. So I'll stop there. If you go to lootproject.com, you can see a lot of this. And if you go to loot.foundation, it's a site that I built that acts as kind of like this guidebook for people making sense of this world. And it provides a ton from like I said before, micro, macro to meta, I guess, like high level stuff, like what is loot and how does it work? But also really deep stuff, like specifically how do the name prefixes in loot work, and what is the order and structure inside of them? And OMG, it turns out that there's specific subsets of the lore that's hidden right inside the contract. So stuff like this is in here, as well as I mentioned the word LDK before. LDK refers to a lore development kit, like a software development kit, but for collaborative world building. I think we were the first ones. A guy named Loot Hero coined that term LDK. And when I searched for lore development kit on Google, 2 months ago, there were 0 results, and now there are some results. So it's kind of fun to find the rough edges of Google and look out over the edge of the world and realize that you're creating something new. But it's a set of foundational principles in physics that people can build on top of, like fundamentals about like what is loot, what's an adventure, where did it come from, but then also like a meta timeline, which is kind of fun to look at, that there's like a timeline of the Lootverse that people can work inside of that provides sort of a meta canvas to work inside of. Still infinite space for creativity, but just enough structure so that we're not stepping on each other's toes and contradicting each other's projects and devolving into just fantasy words, but ideally building this collaborative, collectively created, infinitely expansive, yet still loosely cohesive universe. And to me, that's what's giving me the most energy out of this whole project, is just through the permissionless, composable, decentralized nature, we can build something that's never before been seen, which is this community crafted, community owned world. And it's a world both in lore form, but also in IRL. I'm not going to pull up my Discord again, but my IRL world has now become Loot, in that the people that I talk to and the calls I have and the friends I'm making and the connections and the people I'm building with have come together through the mist, is what I always talk about. Like the mist is a concept within Loot, but like we've come together through the mist and found each other and have just been all inspired to work together to build this thing. And I guess I found myself through the mist on this phone call today too. So I know I did most of the talking, but if there's any follow-ups with folks from this call today, you want to talk, directly, hit me up on Twitter, find me, in the Hyperverse. You know where to find me. Or if you're excited about what I shared today, come join us. It's open, it's permissionless, and honestly, anyone can join the Discord and pop in, say hi, and check out what's going on. There's honestly something for everyone.
Ooh, yeah. Do you have a bit more time for just one question, Tim?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I think Adam has a question, and I think Adam is working on VR, so this is pretty interesting. So Adam, do you want to hop on?
Sure. Hey, thanks very much for that. Yeah, I'm just wondering on the sort of practicalities. I'm quite active with a group of a community mostly in VR chat, but in a bunch of other social VR platforms, some on-chain ones. And obviously there's a massive technical hurdle in terms of processing power when you're running games in VR. How does that all managed on a project that's got a CCO starting point? Do you know, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the people who are doing, you mentioned the VR element.
Yeah. I'm curious if maybe give me a little more info. Like, are you worried more about the processing power and the costs of doing that on chain? Worried about more the intellectual property of it?
No,
Coordination.
Yeah, just practicality on the processing power. So like I guess when you're running a cloud-based social VR platform, it's really expensive to run, I guess. And that's what I'm wondering, how is that sort of thing being funded? Is what you've referenced working in that way, or is that running on people's local devices? I mean, yeah.
There hasn't yet been a full-on, step into VR goggles experience based on the Lootverse yet. And honestly, I don't think anyone's built VR with an on-chain backend. That would be incredible. Through the L2s, there may be an opportunity to do that. Through like a lot of Loot is right now thinking about moving to Starknet, which is a ZK platform or ZK ecosystem. And that may enable some of it in that it's like multiple orders of magnitude cheaper and multiple orders of magnitude more accessible for users to do on-chain actions. But also, like, you don't need everything to be on-chain. That's what I would take with a grain of salt here, is that all these words I'm throwing out today, they're intended to be used as things that like enable good, or enable more joy, or enable more collaboration, or enable more success, but they're not religions. Decentralization used incorrectly as a religion, I think, can end up paralyzing projects. On-chain used incorrectly as a religion can paralyze a project. CCO used incorrectly as a religion, I think, can paralyze a project. So if you go too far with any of this stuff, just like anything in life, I guess, it probably holds you back. So I'd say, like, I have no idea what project you have in mind in general, but as a generalized concept, I would say, like, get into the distillation, or like distill down exactly what the core like human emotion, or like the core sort of human element is that you're trying to manifest in the world, and then use these tools to advance that. And if there's tools like hosting a game on AWS in the cloud, and that's going to work better than doing something on chain, then don't do it on chain. If there's pieces where it's around like, we want the state to be composable, maybe there's like light ways to do that on chain. Maybe if you want it to be like the items that somebody discovers and owns from a game truly become owned by them, not owned in their Facebook account or their Google account or their Amazon account, but like truly owned by them. Maybe those items can get pulled up and out of that game and then written back to the chain. So it just kind of depends on what the mechanics are that you care most about. But definitely not everything needs to be on chain. Not everything needs to be decentralized. Not everything needs to be CCO.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. And then one last question, Tim, because I guess from Andy, who was also instrumental in creating the syllabus of Kernel. He wanted to know, I guess he wanted to learn more about how you think about divine DAO lore, and how you yourself think about being a Lord of Lore, right? Like that's a very new title. So how do you deal with that? How do you think about being in that position?
Funny. Take that with a tongue in cheek for sure. When you say title, it's a funny title. No one, that's not a title on LinkedIn, and there's no company here that I'm employed by who calls me Lord of Lore. It's become just like a sort of joke, but also I guess my username inside the Realms Discord, where it's all about lords. Their token is a lord, and I've been helping that core team with a lot of strategic stuff and just sort of connection stuff and really lore stuff, trying to bridge and weave the Realms ecosystem as the foundational fabric of the Lootverse alongside Loot and these other projects. So I don't know, Lord of Lore is tongue in cheek, but to me it means I feel a responsibility to provide the breadcrumbs for other people to choose to follow or choose to ignore. Maybe put differently, if someone pops into the Lootverse and says, I want to build a Dungeons and Dragons game, I want to build a character equipper, I want to build a VR game. I want to build a story even. And I just want to write a story. I want to create the construct such that if they do something that fundamentally contradicts the loot contract that Dom provided us, that they do it with eyes wide open. It is permissionless, so anyone can do that. But my goal is to give people the scaffolding and to give people the information so that they can see how this world works. They can see how loot works. They can see, how greatness works in the loot bags, how the item types work, how the specialties work, how the levels of the items work. They can see the themes that have sort of canonically emerged from the Lootverse. And then with that information, somebody who's creating on top of it or extending loot can choose to weave inside of the existing principles and extend them and expand them, or choose to contradict them. And I'm not going to be the one to stop them from contradicting it, but I want to make sure that people don't accidentally contradict it or accidentally build something that's like fundamentally and unnecessarily contradictory of the existing Lootverse. I'd like it to be that if somebody's going to put their time and energy to go build stories and create content and make a game and put their time into this, that they have enough information about how this all works and what's happening, both at the L0, L1, and L2 levels, so that they can make conscious decisions to participate in this grand experiment of decentralized world building, or to make a decision to go fork off in their own direction. So that's a long answer, but that's how I'm thinking about sort of my role in some ways when it comes to lore. Sure, I'm also a writer, and as you can see, I've written all these words. There's a lot of words in here about how this world works. I probably write too much and talk too much, but I love this stuff. And I'm also, I guess maybe a sci fantasy writer, but not a real one, more just a LARPer. But to me, it's not like me writing the lore. It's me creating the scaffolding and the breadcrumbs and the invitation to come build together with us. You also asked though about Divine DAO, so let me share this. This is not been shared yet to anybody, so I probably shouldn't be sharing it. You can see it's on the Vercel website right now. This is a staging site, but we're about to launch this. A group of writers, artists, and builders coming together to discover, create, and curate these stories of loot through collaborative storytelling and visual media. And there's stories of the Divine City. There's this LDK. There's a Genesis Scrolls program that we've been working towards, which is a multi-project CCO initiative to give no strings attached grants to writers to bridge them into Web3 through the Lootverse. To bridge in a writer who's like, I don't even know much about Web3, but I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, and I want to write here. The Genesis Scrolls program, it's going to have about 100 ETH in a multi-sig. And with that 100 ETH, we're going to create prizes and rewards and encouragement and grants for writers and media creators to come create these stories together. Literally no strings attached. I'd say the only string would be like a strong preference that if somebody takes a Lootverse grant, that they write Lootverse content. But I think that goes without saying. But the other preference too is that if they take a grant here, that they're going to create CCO content. So I don't want to give a grant to Disney to go create content. I want to, unless Disney wants to create CCO content, I guess. But we want to give grants out to people who are going to participate.
I wonder when that will happen, right?
Yeah. And then some other stuff that's in development, this really exciting tablet amulet project, some CCO art, a tower defense game that's being worked on cross projects right now, and more. So anyway, someone asked about Divine DAO, so I want to give it its attention. It's really exciting what's happening here. And this itself is another grand experiment of building a DAO model for collaborative media production. There are a lot of NFT projects, cool, like Azuki's and Muri's and stuff like that aren't DAOs and they're not decentralized. They're NFT media projects that are super exciting. This is one of the first like truly sort of decentralized media production projects, and still an experiment, but excited about what this can become.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Tim. I guess I wanted to also end by saying that I admire a lot on what you're doing here. It really takes it's something new, right? No one's been doing this collaborative world building ever, right? Like, and with the tools that we have in Web3. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And I want to say also, like, the games we play now, right? A lot of them look back at Dungeons and Dragons, like that's their model of a role-playing game. And what we're creating now is something like the new Dungeons and Dragons. It will be the seed for what the games will look at when they create games in the future. So yeah.
Mm.
So
Well,
it's
Paul, you
really,
can
really
make
cool.
goosebumps with that comment. I just spent the past 13 years of my life running a B2B tech software company, and I feel so lucky to be able to be surrounded by people who are so inspired and so inspiring, thinking about things so deeply about the future in a completely orthogonal space, parallel universe, inventing a
It is,
universe where we can
Yeah.
create together and just to sort of
Exactly,
find each other and find these shared values and the shared mission
Mhm.
through the world.
Yeah. So we'll make the hyperverse like the vision that we want it to be, right? So yeah, cool.
All right.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so we really enjoyed having you with us, and maybe next time we can have you on board again. And I know some of the folks will reach out to you on Twitter. So yeah, so thank you for the space.
Sweet. Yep. Come find me. Timshel XYZ. Somebody else has Timshel. Actually, you know what? I didn't explain what Timshel is though. So
Oh yeah, maybe you should. Yeah.
I'm pseudonymous here just because I think it's a fun experiment right now. I'll probably just dox, as they say, at some point. Like I don't need to be pseudonymous, but it's just been really fun, and it's been a really empowering experience actually to get empathy for people who do have to be pseudonymous. In this new world, some people, based on their jobs or based on their location or whatever else, maybe do need to be pseudonymous. And when you're pseudonymous, sometimes you find some rough edges or stop signs or red lights or closed doors that you can't get through. And so I've been trying to stay pseudonymous as a way to find empathy for people who are pseudonymous in this world. So it's been really fun. I don't know, I found some really exciting moments where the pseudonymity has allowed me to be more poetic and artistic and
Yeah.
geeky than I normally would be, I guess. But anyway, Timshel is an ancient Hebrew word that I discovered through this book, East of Eden. It's a John Steinbeck book. And if you haven't read that book, it's not sci-fantasy, but it is world building. World building in California in the 50s, maybe, I think. No, it's multi-generational. And there's this moment in here where they use this concept of Timshel, which means thou mayest, to just talk about how like this character, it culminates in this moment in this book of this character's sort of spiritual advisor telling him like Timshel, 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 thou mayest, as in thou mayest choose your own path here. You're not just subservient to destiny. You can choose your own path. And I think that captures this whole story in a nutshell. It's like thou mayest join this universe. It's permissionless. Thou mayest build. It's open. Like thou mayest be a geek. Thou mayest be a different version of yourself and create together. And so I've been trying to channel this energy. Hopefully you're picking that up for me today. But I've also been channeling it for myself.
Yeah.
It felt like a rebirth and a rediscovery of the things that I love in the world.
Ooh, yeah, that's really beautiful. And yeah, so I'll just stop the recording now. But thank you again, Tim. That was really an enlightening talk for all of us.
Sweet. Thank you.